Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar, Design Your Sustainable Garden with Agatha Martello from More Than Gardens. Spring is almost upon us, and I'm sure you're all quite ready to take advantage of the mild weather and the April showers to create a beautiful garden. Lending you a helping hand today is Agatha. Agatha Martello is a conservation biologist and owner of More Than Gardens, certified organic and regenerative landscaping company. She strives to work towards improving our community and restoring the environment. Without further delay, I'll hand this over to Agatha.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It's so many of you. I'm very excited about talking about sustainable garden design. What does that mean? What we are creating with these spaces of ours. And so we're going to talk a little bit about sustainability in the landscape, and we're going to talk a little about designing our spaces. So a little bit about us. Dias already introduced me. I am a conservation biology, and I am the owner of More Than Gardens. We have been working with sustainable gardens and landscapes since 2018. That has been very rewarding for us. I love doing that. And I would like to talk a little about the term sustainable. We have been hearing that term thrown around so loosely nowadays that I feel like the meaning it's kind of lost. And the idea of sustainability is the capacity of a system to endure and maintain itself over time, is to remain, is to endure, really to thrive with time and with adversities. So when we talk about a sustainable garden, we are thinking about a garden that keeps itself, that is going to endure throughout the generations. And why would we do that? The main idea really is the ecological value of a sustainable garden with the focus on sustainability, or to remain over time. A sustainable garden has immense ecological values in multiple ways. It serves as habitats to pollinators. It serves as a genetic pool. It preserves its space, its ecoregions, and provides foods and habitats to birds. And like we see here, some caterpillars, they are so specific to our region. So these beings evolve to depend on those plants, and they work on a symbiotic relationship, which the substitutions for just ornamental, conventional, simple plain landscapes, they are lacking all of that. And there's many other reasons, ecological reasons. It really absorbs more rainwater. It sequesters, it fixes more carbon from the atmosphere. So there's multiple reasons, ecologically speaking. But if you want more reasons for yourself, a sustainable gardening requires less work, because really the idea is a garden that sustains itself. It keeps on its own without having to keep working on it, literally. And because of that, the cost of it ends up being lower over time. You might have an initial investment because you probably don't have a sustainable garden right now, so you had to invest on that a little bit and even put some work on it in the beginning. But in the overtime, because you don't have to put so many inputs, it ends up being a lower cost. It's also known that being around nature improves our health, our physical health, our mental health. There's several studies out there stating that. And when you have a sustainable garden, you have a better relationship with your land, because you learn how to observe, to know what's going on in your land. And the idea of sustainable, it also implies that is an organic garden. You're not going to be putting chemicals that are synthetic. Really, it's counterproductive. It's not sustainable. It's not an activity that can endure. That's the way to look at it. So you end up taking the most of your land. You're going to look around your property, and you learn what your property is giving you, and you're going to go with nature instead of fighting against it. So it's going to use it. And the idea of creating a design, that's sometimes people don't think about it, but the idea is, in an ideal world, you will have your garden the way you want, right? You not that it's not the way it's going to be the way that you want, but the biggest mistake that I see on natural landscapes, on those regenerative landscapes, it's usually, honestly, looks like a mess. It looks like a wild environment, and that's the biggest throw off with a lot of native plants. Some people have some resistance to planting natives because of the idea, oh no, a native garden is messy. But if you take your time to plan and design, put those plants, in the paper and figure out what you're going to do with your land, you're going to create a more harmonious space, a space that you're going to come home to and feel better about it. And sometimes your garden, it looks like a mess and it's not functionable. When you design your landscape, you get more function out of it. It's more accessible. Sometimes you even have wonderful things in your garden, but you don't have access to it because it's so messy. You could be harvesting your cornflowers, for example, for if you have an organic garden. But if it's a mess, you won't be able to use the whole sum of the garden can be. And honestly, the alternative can be dangerous. You can, without planning, your garden can turn it's such a mess that it can be hazard for you. Your enemies in this process of having a neat, a well-thought garden, a garden that gives you pleasure and happiness and full use, it's going to be these two things. It's poor planning and poor initial maintenance. You have to understand that a garden, a landscape, it has all these different parts that are going to affect it. Your garden is not like the garden of your neighbor. You really have to be specific on what are the conditions that you have and plan accordingly. And then you're going to take the time, and that is going to be more successful. It's important to understand also that in the beginning, even though in the end, we're going to expect your garden to have less work, but in the beginning, you will have some maintenance to be done. It's going to be some weeding, it's going to be some watering, these young plants need standing, and that's what you have to keep in mind. So the first step of your landscape, let's say you're going to set new garden, new life, what is going to happen to yourself, you have to focus on site analysis. That is going to be the most time you're going to spend in this whole process. That should be the hardest part. The site analysis is going to start with a study period, right? It's unwise, even though we get very excited, it's unwise for you to have your space and, you get excited about it and you get excited about plants and natives and, building a landscape for you. You're going to go to the nursery and buy those bunch of plants, but without knowing what really is going to thrive and what really should be planting on your space. So this study period, it's recommended to really be done over the course of 1 year. So you have those 4 seasons covered. But there's some certain things that you can take right away. So it's important in this period to know the light path. And the light path does change towards the seasons. There are elements that interfere on that light path. You always look up, always look what buildings, what trees. Are the trees are evergreens? Are they deciduous? They're gonna lose their leaves. Are you gonna have more sun in the winter? And so on. You're gonna find all these patterns for different areas of your garden. So you're also gonna analyze the water path. When it rains, where the water runs. Even when it's sometimes in a dry day, you can see these veins cut through the soil, and you're gonna see that that's the water path. So there are veins of soil that the water erode a little bit. So you're gonna learn along this time of study of your space where the water puddles, maybe it's a good space for you to create a rain garden, or maybe you can do some growing curves to capture more of the water if you have an incline. So in this time of analysis, you also learn what you already have. Maybe you already have a pile of stones that you're going to be able to use. Maybe you have, actually, you do want to have rain garden. You're going to be able to find a first space for it. Maybe you have a lot of oak trees and other deciduous trees, and you're going to have a lot of free mulch. So those are all things that with time, you're going to be able to analyze and find out what your space can give to you. Very important to observe also is your soil. What kind of soil do you have? If it's a loamy soil, if it's a fertile, more clay, more sandy. I often recommend, especially if you're growing food for yourself, I recommend you doing a soil test. Very easy to find certain institutions that do it. I do it through Cornell. They're very open to soil tests for us. And another thing for you to analyze in your space too are the weeds. So there's a lot of weeds that work as bioindicators, which means some weeds that only grow in certain conditions. For example, there's some weeds that only grow in very clay soil. There's some other weeds that are going to grow in very acidic soils and so on. So it's all the time, it's really important for you to analyze and get to know the space that you already have. And so here, when you think of creating the spaces and analyzing, you think about how you're going to use that space. What is the atmosphere with each space based on the activities that you're going to have on that area? So you can, when you look at your landscape as a whole, you can create these different rooms, these different environments according to your use or according to what you want to provide for the area. For example, if you're doing a front yard, you're going to think about something inviting, something beautiful for you to come, for your neighbors, for them to look. Or if you, for example, in an area in your backyard, if you want to create, if you have an outdoor kitchen, maybe you can create a space next to it, which is going to be a food garden. And then close to it, you're going to connect another room because you have a lot of sun, and you're going to create a little meadow, which is going to be loaded with pollinators, which is going to pollinate the garden, and so forth and so on. So how those different spaces connect with each other and how they can be complementary to also optimize the use of your spaces. So the atmosphere that I said here is really, with the design, you can really grow that space and plant on that space things that is going to give you that vibe. So that style, which is, there's many different styles of gardens, and we're going to talk a little bit more about design. So that's the way you want to feel, really, the way you want to feel in that space counts. You're going to interfere with that. You want to feel more energetic near your kitchen garden where you're going to be entertaining, or you want to feel a little more zen near your meadow with a meditation space. So all these things are things that you got to consider when you're using the land. And in all this observation, you're going to find microclimates. You're going to look where the sun heats and is a little bit more warmer, but there's a little more shaded area, more shaded by an oak. It's very damp. Maybe you can create a woodland, nice for meditation. But the idea is the idea of sustainability in the landscaping plan is to consider the minimal change. Don't go ahead and level it all up. That is not sustainable. You're going to always fight that space. You're going to use the land, because that's the idea of really the landscape. You're going to make that work for you, but in a way that it's already there, finding out and discovering the spaces that you have. So consider creating ecosystems, really. So if it's a brand new canvas, and create spaces, really complete ecosystems. See if you can provide water, see if you can provide shelter. This way, or make sure the ground covers are complementary with each other, so you can create a whole thing. Because the more of a closed ecosystem it is, the more self-sustainable it is, because one thing is going to complement, one element is going to complement the other. And that is important also for us to consider in all seasons. What are going to be there? What are going to freeze? What are spaces that have more use that you have, to consider in summer, for example, when the garden is really blooming and crazy, and pathways and things like that. So are things that you consider, but always thinking about nature guiding your steps. So that's the most fun part here. Once you already did that part of planning, which really is the hardest part, because you're impatient, you want to plant, you want to create something, right? So once you already know your conditions, because that's what you have for your plants to thrive, now you're going to go to the nursery, and now you're going to make a plant list first, actually. So you make that wish list, see if that wish list matches with the conditions you have, and you can get creative. For example, here in this picture, we wanted a semi-transparent fence with filter privacy, and then we selected these plants where was the most sunny space, which was by the driveway, the only place. So we're going to try and get creative with the spaces that we have, and then we're going to select those plants. We're going to select those plants knowing their needs, all their needs of sunlight, of the soil type. Very often we neglect the pH of the soil. Very often I see a garden that is not doing so well, and then we do a pH test, and then the pH comes, not so ideal for whatever's planted there in the past. So we had to adapt accordingly. Changing pH of the soil, it's something extremely unsustainable. It's hard. It's better if you try and plant with what you have. So you're going to also consider the water needs of those plants that you want. Do you have that amount? Are you trying to grow rosemary in the deep forest? Are you trying to grow a hydrangea in a desert? So those kind of things that you have to analyze. Make sure the place of origin of your plant, see where it's from. It's like I said again, a rosemary that comes from a place that is extremely dry and arid with a lot of very windy is never going to grow in a deep forest. So you got to consider, when you look at the plants of the place of origin of a plant, it gives you a lot of hints of how it grows. Ideally, we're going to go for natives, of course, but I'm going to talk a little bit. So important for you to think about, very important, it's spreading habits. Some plants will spread. For example, the black-eyed Susans. Black-eyed Susans will spread. Never planted a black-eyed Susan that wouldn't take over. So consider that in mind when we are placing our plants, when you're putting everything in our design. Consider that plant is going to spread very little or very much, depends on how much what you want. And this is the number one mistake that I see people and other landscapers doing too, is just consider the mature size of a plant. We do not think that you're going to be bonsaiing, trying to prune a plant down to try and make it small and fit and accommodate their needs. That is unsustainable. You have to consider the mature size of the plants. You are landscaping for the future. You're going to plant an oak. Remember how tall an oak gets, and it will get it. It will get that tall. So don't plant an oak under wire, or try not to plant things also under canopies and things like that. So that's unsustainable. So that's really, if there's one thing you want to take in consideration, take this. Make sure you know the mature size of your plant and give it space for it to grow, because very often in a few years, the overcrowded garden has to be ditched, because once there's certain plants that once pass to a certain point, they're never going to come back. Okay, so there's the natives versus exotic communication. I always gonna advocate for natives. That's why we're here for. We are here to plant natives, to encourage natives. That's what we do. Natives do have much more ecological value. They are, they evolve here. They evolve to be where we are. So because of that, they're gonna need less maintenance, less amendments, water, fertilizer, things like that. And they also provide for the biology, all the fauna around us, and really help us create that environment and with higher sustainability. But I do believe also that it's unsustainable to think that we will not grow exotics at all. And my number one argument is always going to be food. We grow food is in the nature of the human beings. Some humans, like some of us, also love some plants. I have so many clients. They love their native gardens, but there's that one plant that they cannot get rid of because they have emotional value for them. It was a gift from grandma, or that was my father's rose, and that is very, very common. And as long as it's not an invasive, it's fine, as long as you really try to keep that amount of exotics below 30% on your properties. And if you can, let's try and bring the exotics indoors. If you have exotics that do have spreading habits, just plant them for example, mint. Please don't plant mint in the ground, but mint in a planter with a saucer with some sand, and then that's going to stop them from spreading so much. Also avoid these kind of plants to go to seed, but the more as possible, try to go for natives. On that note, we do have a communication, a discussion really about sustainability and climate change. This discussion is in regards on what are we going to do next. So the climate is changing. We have been feeling the weather warming up season after season. So as year after year, so every year is a little bit warmer. And if there's community discussing if we should start bringing more climate resilient plants to our space to substitute those natives that are not going to handle well the changing climate. There's some people there's some, even I think Cornell University was suggesting bringing some plants from the south more up north. I have seen even horticultural professionals suggesting bringing plants from Asia to New York to substitute those natives because they're more resilient. In my opinion, what I think we should do is always consider the ecological value. I feel if there's a possibility that, we can step ahead of the game and think more sustainably, how does the future look like if we have to bring plants from the south, and think about how is that going to affect, if that's, if we can help out with that or not. I just don't think it's wise to bring plants from so far away, like Asia, that adapts well, but it doesn't have ecological value. So in the sense of sustainability, yes, maybe we should be proactive towards climate change, but we can also consider the ecological value in bring things more from the south than from some other continents. But that is something important for us to consider. Consider that our agricultural zones are going to change if they haven't changed yet. But that's an important discussion, something that we have to consider with our gardens ourselves. So I'm going to discuss a few other sustainable practices on the landscaping, on your design. So when you are in a sustainable garden, irrigation should be minimal. On a mature garden, we shouldn't have to worry so much about irrigation. But unfortunately, we do not live right now in a completely balanced environment. So rain patterns have been strange. We can really not depend on, anything coming as it should. So if you were to, anything for initial maintenance of seedlings, small trees and shrubs, we will have to do some outside irrigation. So I do suggest a drip irrigation with a timer. Consider the timer because it's really not sustainable for us to consider watering all the time. The timer, you can group your plants and then time each zone with their needs. So that is way more sustainable than just spraying water everywhere. Always mulch your soil, because that's going to avoid evaporation. It's going to protect your plants. And if you can, there's from the simplest to the most complex rain harvest systems. You can really, there's some hardscaping, some green infrastructures that really can build your backyard over a water reservoir, and it's wonderful for rain. Or you can have some simple rain barrels. I really do recommend you doing that. It's actually the best water to water your plants because of the nutrients and everything. So I recommend that too. Very important, always avoid exposed soil. I know sometimes we are crazy about weeds and we want our landscapers to be turning our beds all the time, but that's not really healthy for the soil or for the soil really, and it's unsustainable for you. Always consider that in the soil, there's a whole web of organisms that are working and they're breaking organic matter to turn into food for our plants. And that is a constant process, which we depend on. So because this microbiome, it's dead on the soil in so many places, especially agriculture spaces where we keep moving the soil and touching it and turning around and stomping on it, really, we have to keep adding amendments and fertilizers, and that's why our food is really so poor nowadays in nutrients, because it's always based on synthetics, because this microbiome is dead. It's our, like in our gardens, we can rebuild that soil, we can make more soil, and by protecting the soil, avoid exposed soil, that is a great way to do it. And the sunlight itself also burns that biome, that's microbiome. That's why we cover it. We use mulch. You can use your own mulch. You can use your own leaves. You can buy it's mulch cheaper. I have many clients that have them, and then just mulch their yard waste and use it over the beds. Or you can use some ground covers. These are very nice too. You can use some native phlox, some pussy toes. There's native pachysandras. Okay, in the aspect of building soil, we're going to think about compost, which is, we can use that on yard waste that you have. And it's speaking also in the past that we talked about creating rooms. I really like always telling people, if they have enough land and if you have a space in that land that you don't use, make a compost pile, make a compost bin, even if it's just a yard waste, a place for you to lay your leaves. That is a good practice for you, and it's much easier for you to use that resource and have that space for these leaves. So I always recommend that. When you are doing compost, just make sure that the proportions are 2:1 for carbon, and which are brown parts, 2 brown parts for 1 of the green parts, which are the leafies, and to keep that process aerated. So you're always turning that pile, unless otherwise that's going to be, it's more detrimental. It's going to be an anaerobic situation, and that's when it starts smelling and things like that. So that's just the secret of compost. I know a lot of people have a little bit of trouble with that, but that's basically just keeping that 2:1 parts, 2 parts per 1, and the turning, constant turning. Here there's many ways that you can compost. You can create different bins, like you have in the picture down here with the pallets, or you have all these tumblers. And we have here Andrea with a very fun one that is just a ball that you put your things around. So in terms of sustainability and pest control, I always say that happy plants are healthy plants. So a plant that is planted with the right conditions, receiving the right amount of water, right amount of light, good soil, this plant, it's going to be way stronger to fight diseases. And usually in a balanced environment, if you can't create that in your space, little nibbles of pests here and there. There's always there's in a garden that it's inserted in the environment, in nature, always going to have somebody eating it. So the leaves are going to be always nibble, but it's never detriment for the plants overall, because there's a whole spread of things. It's not a crazy infestation. However, we do not live in ideal world, and sometimes there are situations that we do need some pest control. So ideally, you always reuse the organic, but always make sure that even for organic landscapers that turn to you and say, "I'll use this product," in organic products that you buy on the store, just make sure that they are used as they should, because they can also be harmful. Organic does not mean non-toxic. There's plenty of organic labels that it will be best for you not to spray outside, because they are non-specific for their insects or things like that. So they might kill, I don't know, the wasps or the ants that are trying to get rid of, but they're also gonna get rid of butterflies and bees and things like that. So ideally, you will use physical barriers or physical catches. The yellow sticky things also work, and use some companion planting. That works a lot also, especially when you're growing food. So that's really effective, which is the act of grouping plants together that liberates these hormones, and they help each other in a way of deterring or attracting insects for them. So another orientation on sustainability of landscaping, there's a lot of people that use landscaping lights in their properties. It's not, I understand that it's a matter of safety, and sometimes it's important for you to illuminate a path that you're walking, but overall, illuminating the outdoors at night, it's never good for wildlife. It's sometimes not even safe. It can cause glare, and it's not good for wildlife. It really disturbs this. At night, there's a lot of activities in the insect world, and these lights can be really disruptive. So the national parks make this guide here with these lamps, and overall, usually they're lamps that are covered. They have some side of shield, so this way it's more focused to the ground and doesn't cause so much harm for wildlife around. So if you are to have these landscaping lights, ideally use also LEDs and solar panels to be, the most sustainable as possible. And now we're going to talk a little bit about some design principles, right? So you learn all of that, so you know all the sustainable, you have the pockets. I know what's the sustainability. I have that all in my heart already. That's what I'm going to move forward. Now you're going to put that in your plan. You're going to put it in a paper or in the computer. So you do what you prefer doing. I use both. Depends of what I'm creating. If I'm doing a more complex landscape, I'd rather doing it by hand. Or if it's something simpler, some placement, I use some simple softwares. There are many softwares, honestly. They are not always easy to use and not usually cheap. But if you're starting, if you want to do something simple, I would just do, the hand sketch. The main thing for you to put on that paper, it's going to be the primary structures that are there. You're gonna put your house, and you're gonna try and put it as accurate as possible in terms of scale. You're gonna put the permanent trees, and then from there, I recommend you using different layers in creating different situations for your different seasons. In different layers, you're gonna also create, the transparent paper, that you can create and indicate on that drawing your different ecosystems, different microclimates, and that you identify and what you pretend to create from that. So a very big thing that I hear a lot about native plants and how do you make a space harmonious, it really is the distribution of height. That's the most important consideration when you are placing a garden. This design over here, where the plants are distributed in harmonious balance. This is not a symmetrical drawing. It is a balanced drawing. There's nothing wrong with symmetry. I just don't, and it's not so much in my style. Once I heard that the only symmetry present in nature is that one imposed by the man, which there's nothing wrong with it. A lot of people like symmetry. A lot of people like those mirroring of the two sides or the repetition of patterns, that also kind of symmetry. But you don't have to make a garden like that. For example, in this image, the balance of the ponds in one side and the small tree and the other larger trees making a triangle, and they compensate, they balance each other with the elements, with the chair and the center garden over there. Those things that are in harmony between their heights, and that's really what's important. It might seem very basic, but very important. Put your larger plants towards the back. Know the size of your perennials. Sometimes they get really tall, so put them more towards the back. Important to know the colors that go towards the back also are gonna get more shaded up, more darker. You don't see them as much. So consider lighter colors also towards the back, brighten up those spaces and things like that. So here, there's two examples of gardens. This garden here on the left, it's a symmetrical garden. Even it's a very full garden, but it's a symmetrical garden. We can see the repetition of patterns with the evergreens in the back, the cedar in the center. Other side there's repetitions as well, and there's a repetition of shrubs and perennials and colors as well. So that's a symmetrical, very native and very beautiful garden. And on the other side, it's not a symmetrical garden. I apologize for the angle of my plants. It's always like that. I'm good at making them, just cannot read the angle so well. But you can see towards the back, there's a taller tree, which is a Magnolia virginiana, and then a leather leaf actually. And then there's a lower shrub, I think it's a dogwood in front of it. And then we come with the red buds, and then the smaller cedar in the ground over there. So there's the balance of height and low, and then high again, and then there's a balanced distribution close here to the monarda. There's another smaller shrub that is also give the heights again. So that balance, that up and down or different balance between the elements, those are the things that are gonna give you a better structure in your gardens. Like I said, always consider the taller plants in the back and the smaller, and then medium towards the front of it, and then the smaller plants in the front. So knowing the mature size of your plants, it's very important. In that sense, also, there's plants that they have different roles in your garden, right? You're gonna have those structural plants, which I usually use as evergreens. They are gonna be the bones of your gardens. They're gonna be there forever, and they really are dense plants. You're gonna see them as, really as structures. Like I said, I like to think them as bones. Not everything not only plants can be structural. You can have other things like stones or bird baths, which is the same thing for focal points. There's some focal points are that elements in your garden that's gonna call your eye. You're gonna pull it. Sometimes you want to pull it right in front if you want to really call into it. Or if you have a long garden, maybe you put your focal point all the way towards the back, so it calls your eyes. Maybe, so that is that. Again, a focal point doesn't have to be a plant. It can be a sculpture, a piece of art. It could be a bench. It could be a water feature. So, but consider those. The focal point is really going to be the center of that space that you're creating over there. And then we have the filler points, which can be your perennials or fluffy perennials, or little shaggy shrub. We have the transparent plants, which could be, agora or grasses. We have ephemeral plants, which last just for a little bit, so we have to consider that as well, which are the bulbs, for example, the spring ephemerals. And they're the functional plants, which I keep talking about, the rosemary. I love rosemary. And they serve a purpose to you, and there are space for them in your garden as well, as long as you do it well planned and well designed. Like I said before, let's always consider the garden through the seasons. Consider the structural plants, how they're gonna look like without all the perennials in front of them. Consider the pathway that's gonna be all covered up in the summer. Are you gonna plant anything underneath that it requires so much sun? So consider all these things. Consider, the colors of plants in the fall, and think about, I really like doing that in my gardens, and I think that's important, makes people happy. It's always flowers. So consider the flowering for each station, or each season. Just put these plants and select your flowering, blooming times according to your seasons, and make sure you have plants for blooming in different seasons in different areas also to complement each other. When we are talking about color, there are many ways that we can use color in your garden, and the use of color in your garden also going to give you a different atmosphere. So if you use colors that are complementary, which are opposed, this is the color wheel of used a lot in design. So when you use complementary colors, are the colors that are opposite across the wheel. So those color opposites, if you combine them, it's going to give you a more energetic feeling. It's going to give you more contrast. It's going to give you it's going to give you, like I said, energetic, harmonic feelings. But if you put colors that are more closer together, the colors that are analogous, like the pinks and purples, they're gonna give you a more mild feel, a more zen, a calming feeling, and not so energetic like complementary feelings. There are people that like using colors, monochromatic. Some people like using one colors. I've done many white gardens. People like white gardens. Sometimes when they're memory gardens, some people like Gothic gardens. I've done Gothic all black gardens before, which is fun. But you can use that, that combinations as you like and you enjoy, and consider the different feelings. I just don't like using colors that are too, like, often sometimes too close in shades, because I feel like they can really cancel each other out. So for example, I wouldn't use so much a blue violet close to a violet, because I don't think they complement. I will always put, this is my taste, I will put something to distinct them a little better, like to call the eyes more for different colors. Other considerations on your design, you can design thinking about styles. They are, in the school of landscaping arts, there are many styles of your gardens. People like country gardens or cottage gardens. They are modern gardens, and all really depends of your taste, what you like, how do you want to feel in your space. And consider also the materials that you're using. Consider, honestly, really most sustainable as possible. There's so much that you can find in your space and locally. Check Facebook markets, that people are giving things away. Actually, a new study came up saying that the gardening community has been not very good in terms of sustainability, but that's because all these gadgets that we have, all these crazy complex raised beds and gimmicks that come, it's not very good industry for recycling. And so we should do better in those terms. So consider the materials that you use in their sources, and hopefully they're going to be as sustainable as possible. And consider also that your materials will give Also a sense of the style of your garden. For example, if you use a lot of stainless steel, that's going to give you more modern vibes, which would clash with I don't know, a boho, I just said it, a cottage garden, for example, sorry. So it would it clash a little bit of the style. So I, even though I like creating different spaces, different rooms in the landscape, I like thinking of, complementary in style. And not that you cannot have a Zen garden, in a corner, kind of separated to energetic kitchen. I was just flow well the spaces together. I wouldn't clash so much. So materials are really things that are gonna give you that. The most sustainable thing that you can do in your garden right now really is to reduce your lawn and avoid really complicated crops. Lawn is a very complex crop that it's not from here. We need to keep tending to it with different amendments, with lots of water, and that's not really sustainable. You can have an open space. I understand a lot of people have kids and want to, use their space better. So you can use alternatives to lawn, reduce the space of your lawn, but you can use, there's some, a few slides ago I showed a space that it looks like a lawn, but it's all moss. And you can do, because that's what grows over there. So with no irrigation, the moss takes over, and that's how it is. And they need that open space for their kids. So I get it. You can use a little, there's some carrots that are native. Anthony from Dropseed always recommends using purple love grass. I've never used it to recreate a lawn. I've used it other species, but that's an option too. So just try and reduce as much as possible. If you are to use any tools, consider using electric tools. Try to buy the same brand so you have the minimal amount of batteries as possible. Recycle your batteries of your tool if you can. I always also going to be an advocate for growing your own food. I think it's wonderful for yourself, for the environment, because you use less from the store-bought, and you also, I believe that growing your own food strengthens your community because it makes you share your food. And I think that's a great, good practice for all of us, especially and only on, I'm going to say only, if it's organic grow, because why would you do otherwise? Think also about climate conscious gardens. Think about growing landscapes that actually reduce the temperature of your house in the summer, and with the citrus tree actually increases the temperature of your house in the winter. Considering like shielding your ACs to reduce that, apparently I think it's almost 10% of the energy that it requires if you shield your ACs from the sun. So that's also a sustainable practice that can help you in your landscape. And think about, really consider adding some green infrastructures on your space, on your landscape. And green infrastructures come from structures, hardscapes really, that can benefit the environment as well. And some examples are permeable driveways. They're permeable pavers that are going to absorb the water. That is a big thing with water runoff from storms. Rain gardens are also a part of a green infrastructure, and they help you absorb more water in your space. There, if there's a space that you see the water runs off a lot there, you can you can create a rain garden. So that is really good for you because very easy to maintain space. It's a beautiful space and good for the town and for pollution of the ocean. So a quick recap of what we talked about. So the idea is you promote ecosystems in your space. You don't skip the planning. Look at your garden, really all the elements that you have. Take that time for planning, for observing what are your conditions. Don't fight nature. Think always of the balance of the height distributions. That is the key to a very good design for a balanced and harmonious garden. Know your plants. That's also essential because you're gonna give the right conditions to your plants. Know how big they're gonna do, and know how they're gonna serve you, really. Because honestly, very often we use certain very useful, delicious plants as ornamentals, but they are actually edible, or they are even medicine. So if you have an organic garden, you can be using that for yourself. And gardening, thinking about the future, thinking about preserving an ecosystem for the future generations, for the future of that space, really. Recently, some clients came to me and said, we want a garden here that is going to last forever. We're going to stay in this house forever. So think about it. Think about your garden that's going to be there forever. And that's how it should be. Now it's up to you. You can take the first step. You start small. You can take square pockets of your garden and make a little meadow, make a little, give it a try with a garden bed. I'm going to do one sustainable bed, and I'm sure you're going to be delighted, because it's going to be your most beautiful, easiest bed in the world. Share the word on regenerative landscaping. This is a movement that's growing. It's extremely important. We are really regenerating the land, and each garden counts. Please help a professional, hire a professional if you can, even if it's just for consulting. It's so important, that part of starting with the right foods, because so often I see people that get frustrated and they keep trying and trying, but there's something that doesn't go. If just hire somebody that understands, that really knows what they're talking about, they have a good reputation, and shop local. We have nurseries that sell literally local specific plants. Dropseed Natives is always, I'm going to promote them, because they're excellent nursery that sells local plants. So now it's up to you. Your choice matters, and let's get in touch. So you can follow me on my socials. I'm always talking about regenerative gardens. I'm always teaching some details or how to plant. I know this was a lot, and there's so much information. And it's hard. I'm not going to turn here. A lot of people turn to me and say, oh, no, it's just some grounds, just know your plants. I know it's a lot. And that's why there are full-on professionals and that can help you out. So Rewild can help you out. There's universities that are open to take questions. I'm always available as well. You can email me or give me a call. And that's it. I thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Agatha. Thanks for the interesting, very informative presentation. And I think we'll take a couple of minutes to get some questions here. Agatha is going to answer some.
I have a question. Just thank you so much for this amazing presentation. My question is it possible to create a mostly medicinal or food-based garden on top of an already existing landscape through designing like this? Thank you.
Sure. It actually, it's going to depend. Usually, there's so many plants that are medicinal, really, and depends of the species that you want to grow, what you already have growing. Because it's very difficult to create a garden where there's invasive places. For example, I'm not going to tell you to create an organic garden with medicinal plants on a bed of ivy, English ivy. So you understand what I'm saying? It's really going to depend of your site specifically. If you have the right conditions, why not? That's actually most of what I do. I come to a garden and little by little, we start changing that space. It's really hard for people. They really, not everybody, but a lot of people look at plants as living beings that they are. So they don't want to chop everything down, and I get it. So we start from there. So yes, it's possible, as long as you really know, the conditions of your plants and of your space, and they gotta match.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Agatha. Any other questions?
I see a lot of people saying that they have a lot of shade in the yard. So do you have like a list of shady plants and natives that you could recommend?
So actually, I just got a list of ferns of the Northeast, but it doesn't have to be only ferns. We do have a lot of gardens, a lot of native plants that are gonna grow in the dark. We have native coral bells, heucheras. We have native rhododendrons. We have natives. Joe pine weeds, actually, I grow well in part shade. It really depends of how much shade you have and what are the plants that you just have to adapt for it. But we have plenty of ferns. I'm looking here to a list of at least 10 ferns. So I don't have, I can't give you a list, you can find it, but there's plenty of material online that if you want to list for your conditions, native plants, who has there's Limpy, there is a very good resources on plants for different conditions. So it's plenty of woodland areas on Long Island that you can even inspire yourselves in native spaces. But yes, we have plenty of plants for shade. You just have to don't fight it. I know it's sometimes a little frustrating, but accept the conditions that you have. See if you, for example, if you want to plant something that really needs full sun, try to get even a non-conventional space. Even if it's in your front lawn that you want to grow food, it's possible to do it as long as you have a nice design about it. Because nobody's going to complain about something that looks beautiful. And you can make it look beautiful. It's just, like I said, planning on it.
Taking cue from that, we also have some people who are fighting deer infestation. So any examples of deer-resistant plants that can be used?
I feel like in the terms of the deer problem, which can be really a problem, you can plant deer-resistant plants, which honestly, there's not a lot that are natives that are deer-resistant. You can get the American holly is a very good option, but then what are you gonna do? You're gonna make either a fence of hollies, or you're gonna do either a fence, a physical fence. And by experience, what works best against deer, it is physical barriers. There's not much going around it, and they have to be tall because the deer will jump them. So if you have a landscape that needs to be protected, unfortunately, just a physical barrier, that's the most sustainable way. It's going to be a one solution, and it's going to be permanent.
Yeah, so that's true.
That's
yeah. Unfortunately.
That's my experience. For deer, unfortunately, just blocking them, or planting something prickly like the holly. They don't like the American holly very much.
Anything for rabbits? We have some
same thing. Maybe some physical barriers. Maybe planting for rabbits. Some people do that too. Have a garden, a specific garden for the buddings for the rabbits, to kind of deter a little bit. So that's, to be honest, there's some people that do recommend it, some dog pee. If you have big dogs or your neighbor, can have them pee around a little bit. Some people say that help. I'm not sure, but people use that.
Speaking of dogs, someone wants to know here what if they can find a list of plants that are safe for dogs to eat, for dogs that eat leaves.
That's a very specific question, and I have created gardens that are just dog safe, and it's really making a selection of what you have. I can send it over to you. What I picked, I have some clients that are very specific about their dogs, because the dogs go and they can be toxic. I know the rhododendrons are toxic for dogs, so gotta be careful a little bit with those. But just I have that list. I don't have it on top of my head, but I do have them. Feel like I can send it over. You can email me.
So we encourage the participant to email Agatha.
Yeah, and I can send it over that list. And it's a all native garden with all dog safe, pet safe plants, and I can send that is for you. I'm seeing here a question saying about wetlands planting. Wetlands are is a very important topic, and it's one of those areas that we have to be legally very strict about it. You shouldn't touch wetlands. You should either improve it or not really use it at all if you can avoid it, because they're extremely fragile ecosystems. They're already and that means that they have very specific beings, animals, little fish, little crabs, little, shellfish. They're depending on that space for procreation, for sheltering, for food. And there's so little of this space that is remaining. The wetlands, most of our wetlands are now considered an area that should be preserved. So legally, so there's a lot of restrictions, regulations that we have to follow through. And if you do have wetlands in your property, I strongly recommend you to either find a program to help you out, or if you can and you're able to do it yourself, try and regenerate that space. You are going to be gifted with beautiful stocks, beautiful animals, birds, and that are in a beautiful space for you to look and preserve.
Thank you, Agatha. Let me see.
I see some people here struggling with transition of the lawns. They're trying to do with purple of grass. One thing that we can do, I know there's plugs, and plugs can be expensive. Yeah, it's mostly because of the volume. So one thing that you can do is try and grow from seeds. One strategy for that is if you want a higher probability of that working, is you kill your grass during the summer. You made a big sheet of layer of seeds on the nice soil. You cover it with light mulch, very light mulch, like maybe hay or very light wood chips, so the plants can go through nothing too thick. I do recommend the thicker pieces for the raised beds, so they don't break as fast and they take the nitrogen off. But on that breaking down of the mulch during the winter, that should be a good start for you to have that along in the next season. So that's a strategy. You can do that. It's cheaper than doing with plugs, but it does require more maintenance, because you're probably gonna have more. It takes more time to establish. You have to weed more, and the plants. The smaller the plants that you grow, the more maintenance they're gonna have.
Wonderful. Thank you, Agatha.
Absolutely.
Thanks for taking all the questions, answering them patiently.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you for having me. This was great.